see, you got 5 minutes yet.
Yes.
Now the minutes, we've got the minutes for December 2nd and January 5th.
Yeah, and there's an error on the December 2nd.
Noted a few.
I'm sorry.
Why don't I run through them?
Yeah, but there's a bunch of text at the end which doesn't belong. I'm not sure why that happened that way.
It looks like notes.
Yeah, and that's what they were, and I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why that happened. It looks like they weren't totally finished. So that's my fault. If you could hold off on those, and then I'll redo them for next week. I just fix the end.
Okay, well, I've got a bunch of other points for you besides that chunk.
Okay, that's fine.
So shall we go through them?
Sure, as long as we have time.
Or do you want to wait for that?
I'm sorry.
We may not have time. We'll go through them on the call.
Okay, that works. And Jackie had done the ones from the 4th. So what we have are the 11th, or the 2nd and the 11th, or the 2nd and the 4th are here.
Right. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, Charlie. Hello, Kevin.
Hey.
What's in that thermos, Kevin?
Sparkling water.
I got Mountain Dew, Diet Mountain Dew. That's quality stuff.
I remember people of a certain age who had to pull all-nighters to write briefs, used to use Mountain Dew and cigarettes. They said it was a very effective way.
I didn't get onto Mountain Dew soon enough, so no dose was my resort.
Not that we would ever endorse that whatsoever.
No.
That's reprehensible activity. That's very, very bad. That's only allowed by professionals.
No dose, no comment.
I am. I'm so I turned off my video because it looked scary. I'm in the car.
Yeah,
and
it was very, it was very goth there, Anne-Marie.
Yeah.
I
I'm on
think,
my way home from Newark. So
I think some folks are having some problems with some of the links, just for what it's worth.
I had a problem with the link too.
Well, that's not good if you are.
Right. So Janine, is Janine on?
I'm here.
Okay. Can you go to the agenda and see? The link just doesn't seem to be working.
Okay.
Yeah. So Andrew Williams just said that the hyperlink isn't working. It has to be cut and paste. So there's something wrong where the hyperlink is not working.
Okay.
It when I got the email invitation and clicked on the calendar invite, that populated my calendar, and that the link in the calendar entry worked fine.
Right, but
So-
that was your panelist email.
That's probably right.
Oh,
That's
so
not
it's,
the one.
so you're
the one
talking
that's on
about
the
in the
agenda.
agenda. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, I am updating it now so that anyone else who wants to get in can.
What does our, oh, we have 13 participants, 9 attendees. So Andrew's in, among others. Well, it's we're still missing a couple of people from the committee itself, so we better wait.
I think Khalid might be in the participants, but not a panelist. Thought I saw that.
I will check. Give me a second. Okay, I updated the agenda so that if anybody from the public is trying to get in, they will, oh, I see Khalil. Okay. If anybody from the public is trying to get in, they will have the correct link.
Okay. So we're missing Dennis and Tim still. There's a phone number in the attendees that I don't recognize.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Well, we have a quorum, but I'm reluctant to, maybe, why don't we tackle the minutes? Because I've got some things on the minutes. So let's call the meeting to order just so we can hit agenda item number 1. Does that make sense? No objections?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So calling the meeting to order, and I have to confess I haven't finished reviewing the January 5th minutes, but I do have some corrections to the December 2nd. Janine has already pointed out that a block of text just consists of notes, and she'll go back and fix that.
So,
But
so Rob,
In
Rob,
the
Rob,
yes.
is your goal just to share some changes? But I haven't had a chance to read these yet. I didn't get them till late this afternoon. So I started to read, but I didn't have a
Okay.
chance to finish. Will we have an opportunity before we have to vote on them to read through them?
Yeah, well, let's look at them next weekend.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I was
haven't
gonna say,
finished with the-
You can wait and approve them. We wanted to get them out even though they were late, because we know that as you are formulating the recommendations, you may want to draw on them. So,
No, I appreciate that. I
wanted to
just
make
thought
sure
some
that
of it looked, when I glanced at one of them, it looked a little incomplete. It looked like raw notes, if you will. So.
Right. You're right. So one thing would help me, Janine, is if you would send us the draft minutes in Word form, because that way I can highlight my changes rather than telling you paragraph, page, line, and all that. And you're muted right now, Janine.
I can do that. I apologize. I have done that with the council, but I forgot to do it here. I will do that.
It's no big thing. We usually send them out in PDF. But if you do that for everybody, that way if somebody sees something, they can propose their insert or their correction highlighted in Word. It's a little bit more efficient for everybody. So we have punted item 1 on the agenda. Tim.
I just got a text from Dennis.
And?
I got a text and he said he's having technical difficulties and will be there in a minute. So right. I'm watching the.
And Khalil, we sneaked Dennis's item, which he promises will be short, into C1 ahead of parking permits.
Saw that. Yeah, the Cape Henlopen Drive, no problem.
Yeah. Andrew, thanks for alerting us to the link problem. We're up to 20 attendees, so it's obviously working.
I believe at times like this, the responsibility of the chair to provide some light banter. To fill
Trying to provide light banter in the form of correcting the minutes, but you know, don't all get their kicks the same way. There we go.
There's Dennis.
All right, Dennis, we already called the meeting to order. You missed, let's wait till he's connected.
Okay, can you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Dennis, you missed. Yeah, we can hear you. All you missed was that we punted on the minutes. And Janine is going to distribute them in Word form.
You guys hear me?
And
Yes.
It's a little garbled.
it's a little rough.
I can't hear you guys.
Dennis, you're not coming through well.
Yeah.
Video or
She's having trouble getting on. Why do I not?
Dennis, would you, your item C1, the Cape Henlopen Drive thing, would you mind if we kick that off to January 19th? Because we simply can't hear you.
Anyone else having trouble with audio?
Did anybody understand that?
No, it's pretty garbled.
Well, we're gonna have
Can you hear me?
to. So,
There, Dennis, you might want to try.
I can't hear you guys. I'm going to get out and come back in.
It's a bad connection.
So we're gonna move on to item C2, and C1 will be deferred to January 19th as the first substantive item on that agenda.
Okay.
Because we just lost Dennis in fact. So Khalil, I
We
think
need to
you
kinda restart.
offered to lead our discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we just wait 30 seconds? Because I think he's probably trying to restart his link and
Yeah, go ahead.
rejoin.
Did Linda say she couldn't come? Because she's not on either.
Yeah, I was going
I
to ask about
didn't hear from her.
Seen her.
Linda.
I have not spoken with her. Let me see.
No, Linda's in the attendee. Khalil and I needed Khalil and Dennis because they were leading agenda items, but Linda is.
Oh, yeah,
among
I
the
see
attendees.
Linda. Yeah, she's.
Okay, Janine, can you move Linda over?
I just did.
Thank you.
Dennis, can you hear us?
You're on mute, Dennis.
We can hear it, but it's very garbled. Anyone else hearing a garbled sound?
You're
Yeah.
very garbled as well, Allison.
Linda, can you hear us? You're on mute, Linda.
Hearing a clear voice.
Linda, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Okay.
And
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now we can.
Yeah, so we can hear Linda. So, Dennis, I don't know if you're in a part of the, I don't know if you're in a part of the house where the internet isn't strong.
Dennis, not if you can hear us. Apparently not.
He just tried to call me, but I'm doing the Zoom on my phone, so I can't accept a call.
Right.
Can you
Does
chat?
he have the phone number for the call-in? I wonder if you could do it that way. Can he hear us?
I don't,
I'll ask him by chat.
I wonder if,
I just texted him and asked him if he wanted to call in.
okay.
Yeah, but I can use it here all the time. Okay, I'm looking.
Quickly. Turn that off.
Oh, you have, Dennis, you've got one clear connection.
There you go.
Whatever.
All right.
No. I think
you
that you
hear
hung
me?
up the,
Sorry.
yes, that works.
We've got you on the iPad now, so.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, much better.
Linda texted me and she was having trouble getting in as well. I don't know what her status is.
She's
Can
on.
you hear me, but you can't see me?
We can
That's
hear
correct.
you, but we
That's
can't see you. Down on the left bottom corner of your screen, see if you can hover over it and see if it'll tell you to turn on the video.
Oh,
Yes. Wonderful.
here, okay, am I visible?
Yes,
Yeah, we can
and
see you.
audible.
I had
That's
trouble
bad.
too, Linda.
All right, now that we have
It's the top.
Dennis, let's back up to item C1. Dennis, you had a motion on Cape Henlopen Drive.
Yes. What I would like to go back to, we previously we spoke of the possibility of recommending expanding the parking at beaches 1 and 2. When this was considered at the first beach parking committee meeting, it was presented that the beaches and restrooms reached their capacity, would not be able to handle the increased volume. And given that, coupled with the potential environmental impact, that was only briefly mentioned. I'd like to make a motion to recommend to City Council that the parking lot at beaches 1 and 2 not be expanded. Also, that the beaches and restrooms have reached capacity, and also the potential environmental impact. So that's my motion.
Is there a second?
Just a quick question. So essentially the motion, Dennis, is based on the previous committee's consideration that parking lot 1 and 2 will not be expanded.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's my intent.
Okay.
And one of the reasons for that, Dennis, is that it was determined by the city that this might impact, I don't know if it's load capacity, but there wasn't enough infrastructure support to have an expanded parking lot. Is that right?
That the beach could not handle the increased volume, and also the restrooms could handle the increased volume.
Right. Thank you.
We briefly discussed the environmental impact, so they're the reasons I'd like to make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Yeah. Leo got there first. Any further discussion? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Without
Rob, if I might
objection,
just
passes. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, can I talk to Janine? Would it be easier for you if I emailed you a copy of what I just said?
Please, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll email that to you either tonight or first thing in the morning. Okay, Rob, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for keeping it short as promised. And so, Khalil, can you lead us into a discussion of the pros and cons of permit?
About 4 years ago, a group, myself and a group of Lewes residents got together and started having some meetings because we were concerned about the congestion on Lewes Beach, frankly, a lot of the disrespect we felt was happening to Lewes Beach with visitors and others, you know, going to the bathroom in the dunes, everything else. But mostly it was, you know, that and also the congestion. Parking was everywhere and it was hard to see, you know, coming out of side streets, sight lines were obstructed. So I mention all that because conversations have continued, meetings were held. We actually even did a survey that we submitted to the town that we had done, an online survey. And so I mentioned that all in background in that this is not a discussion that's happened in a vacuum. There's been a lot of stakeholder input, not just from Lewes Beach residents, but also people who live in town who have participated as well. And our whole goal was to try to come up with an idea, whether it was parking permits, whether it was restrictive parking, whether it was expanded parking, to try to get a handle on the congestion and what many people felt was a disruption of the family atmosphere of Lewes Beach, a disruption of our enjoyment. And that prompted about 2 years ago between DelDOT and the city of Lewes that prohibited parking 30 feet on each side of the state streets and the city streets on Cedar. And hence the city took the action in conjunction with DelDOT. I think DelDOT actually did it, of outlining with the yellow stripes, prohibiting parking on 30 feet on each side. And that has helped enormously with sightlines, with people not parking right up to the edge of streets, so you don't have to inch out. And that was a very positive development moving forward. Nonetheless, people still parked in those last summer and the summer before. People still were parking in those areas. Clearly, there was no enforcement of that, and that continued and even intensified the conversations that I had and others had about trying to come up with a parking permit policy or delineated parking, anything that would bring some order to the summers here in Lewes Beach. I then crafted a letter to the editor of Lewes, to Cape Gazette, but also sent it simultaneously to the city council. And essentially it outlines a parking permit policy and the reasons why I thought it made a lot of sense. I thought it would be workable. I thought it would restore a lot of the qualities of Lewes Beach and the quality of life that people wanted to have and expected to have here that they had previously prior to the popularity of Lewes and the influx of visitors. And every year, as we know, Lewes has become much more popular, which is a really good thing. People want to visit our town. People want to buy property here. People want to go to the beach. And that's overall a good thing. But however, when it comes to Lewes Beach, it became really, as I've said before, like the wild, wild west. And it was really, really difficult to find parking. And it was a real safety hazard as well. So let me start by saying that the groups that I met with and others all acknowledge the Warner Land Grant. And nobody has ever disputed the fact that Lewes is a public beach and that everyone is welcome. Everyone, visitors, others, and that's never been in dispute. Because I've heard other people claim and keep pushing back on the fact that, Lewes Beach is not private. And everyone understands that. But people parking in other people's parking lots, people changing diapers on people's porches, people these are visitors using other people's outdoor showers. These are all well documented by a lot of residents. And it really became disturbing to a lot of people, and naturally so. So when it comes to a parking permit policy, one of the first things that we've all discussed, and we've discussed this in our last meeting, is finding what we would call appropriate or legal parking spots. So I think that is certainly a place to start that, and we started with discussing that with right-of-ways and other areas. And I've even mentioned that I think on the State Street side, on the City Street side where I live, there is a fair amount of parking that could be delineated. And, certainly on the state streets, there is parking as well. But all the state streets have no parking on at least one side of the street. And that makes sense only because it provides access and it doesn't congest the road. So parking permits aren't obviously new. Everyone, as far as I can tell, everyone in coastal Delaware has them except Lewes when it comes to the beach. Rehoboth, Dewey, Bethany, Fenwick Island. Everyone seems to have them, and they seem to work pretty well. They seem to be actually a very, very robust revenue source for those cities. And I only mention that because it's a fact, but that's not the primary reason why I believe parking permits are a reasonable solution. Although that is something certainly, if we do end up recommending that to the city council, they will have to decide whether that is something that's attractive to them and something worth pursuing. Parking permits do not have to be paid permits. They can be, which would provide the revenue stream. They can be just regular permits that are distributed to homeowners and as well as citizens of Lewes, and ensuring that there are X amount of permits available to visitors as well, that they, if lot one, for example, was overcrowded and was full, a permit, a $10 or whatever it might be permit, or a permit just could be distributed to them, and they could be directed to Lewes Beach. And if there's no parking in Lewes Beach, there's no parking at Lewes Beach. You know, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been to Rehoboth or Dewey or Bethany looking to go out to dinner or to the beach or something, and I've ended up having to come home because there, you know, there's a finite amount of parking. And I think they'll end up obviously being a finite amount of parking in Lewes Beach. So in terms of what I think are the main reasons for all this, let me just go through a couple of them now. You know, Lewes Beach, as we've mentioned before, is a critical, if not the prime asset of Lewes. And we all want to maintain Lewes, the beach. We want to maintain its attractiveness to everybody. And that really comes down to understanding beach capacity, of course, as we've discussed before. And I think that's going to end up being a very important part of identifying parking spots and how many do we actually need. Dennis referenced it earlier, I believe, with lot one. And when lot one was considering being expanded, that was rejected by the city based on capacity reasons. Capacity for the restroom area as well as the beach. And so I think that provides us a bit of a guideline, a bit of a roadmap in trying to look at Lewes Beach when it comes to identifying and figuring out the right number of parking spots. So I'm going to go through real quickly here and read from this, the letter that I had sent to the City Council as well as to the Cape Gazette. So the benefits of a parking permit policy, let me go through them one by one. All Lewes homeowners, not just Lewes Beach homeowners, would be entitled to parking passes, particularly since we are all direct taxpayers. I think that's critically important because, as we've mentioned before, we are taxpayers, and I think some of us have felt that there's been a strong push to add as much parking as possible to accommodate visitors. And some people feel like that's almost at the expense of property owners. And I do think that property owners, because we are constituents, need to have some sort of priority when it comes to this. Number two, a policy would prioritize residential parking for Lewes residents who are more likely to be courteous, safe, and have access to bathroom facilities in reasonable close proximity. I think that's pretty self-explanatory in that we who live here, I don't think disrespect the beach. We know it's part of our community. We live here. We have to, you know, nobody I know is throwing trash on the ground. They're using the trash receptacles. No one is leaving trash by their parking cars. You know, I don't want to go into the litany of complaints that I've heard from people about what visitors have done. I mentioned a few earlier, but nonetheless, I do believe people who live here are going to be much more courteous and understand that taking advantage of Lewes Beach and the community is something that they take pride in. I do want to make clear, number three, I list here, is that we would provide parking passes available to visitors. Again, you know, nobody here wants to deny visitors access to Lewes Beach. I've had terrific amount of encounters with visitors on the beach. Many of them are excited to come here and enjoy Lewes Beach, and I would never want to obstruct them from being able to come here and enjoy Lewes Beach. And as I've mentioned earlier, the Warner land grant is pretty clear that Lewes is a public beach, not a private beach. Number 4 is a key point that I think a lot of us have figured out, and that is a permit policy would eliminate the free rider incentive for beachgoers to access free parking on the small residential streets of Lewes, as opposed to paying in the parking lots. I think a lot of people, including myself, have driven down to Lot 1 and Lot 2 on a Saturday in the summer and have seen plenty of spots open. And it's been mentioned that, you know, one of us may have gone there at a bad time when people are just leaving, but I've done it enough times now, and I know other residents have, to understand that I'm pretty confident that a lot of people know that if they come to Lewes Beach, they don't have to pay. And I think that's an issue that is top of mind for a lot of people, and it's something worth considering. I also think a parking permit policy would really, really improve public safety. And that is by reducing the speed, aggressiveness, and the volume of cars that are on Cedar Street, on the side streets. You know, many of them are you know, looking for parking spots. They're idling around trying to find spots. They're not familiar with the area. And it does cause a lot of issues with visibility and parking, having so many cars just going back and forth and people trying to access the beach. The 6th point I made was a study of parking spaces would eliminate the inconsistency where some streets have no parking on this side and others don't. When cars are parked on both sides of an emergency access street, an ambulance or a fire truck does not have access to Bay Avenue, for example. This has been a long time concern. And I can also add that none of the streets that I've seen on the city side, the Marsh side, have no parking on one side. And people have parked on both sides of those streets. And I've mentioned this before in our meetings, and it is nearly impossible to access those streets because parking is on both sides. And so there needs to be some consistency there when it comes to no parking signs. And that really, again, is more than anything is a safety issue. It's you know, it's shocking to me and many others that there hasn't been a serious accident on Lewes Beach, frankly. A parking permit policy would also encourage the use of beach during non-peak hours, thus balancing out the traffic surges that we have. Most policies are usually 10 to 5. And so, you know, people, you know, would not have to pay or need a permit. Perhaps if they're coming, you know, at 9 or 8 in the morning to walk on the beach, or in the evenings after 5. I mean, that's something that could all be discussed, but this is a way that people will understand that during a certain time period, you do have to have a parking permit. Otherwise, you don't. And that way, people can adjust their schedules accordingly, can decide to go to the beach later or perhaps earlier. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And my understanding from talking to other communities, that's exactly what happens. I mean, people understand when there's a permit required, and they tend to come later in the day. Sometimes people enjoy the beach after 5 o'clock. And that way, I think we would avoid a lot of these surges that occurred during the prime hours. Let me add something that's that I did not write in my letter to the city as a reason why we need to reduce traffic, and that's something that's come up recently, and that is the environment. Rob and Tim, recently the council just passed an ordinance to ban gas-powered equipment, you know, landscaping type equipment, leaf blowers and such. And my understanding in following that debate is the primary purpose was carbon emissions. And if that, and that is certainly a laudable goal in battling climate change and trying to reduce our carbon footprint. I can't imagine something more harmful to our environment and our air quality is continuing to allow as many cars as possible, particularly in Lewes Beach, to be parking everywhere, driving around, idling while they're looking and hunting for spots. I mean, that is, to me, a huge environmental concern that we have all, you know, and so that is only going to enhance and increase our carbon footprint as opposed to reducing it. So in terms of an environmental perspective on it, I would hope many people would support the idea that, you know, a permit policy would better regulate the number of cars that are here and ensure that they are all parked in legally and safe spots. Let me stop there and see if anybody has any comments or any questions about any of those points, or those are the positives I see of a parking permit policy. And I'd be happy to talk about them, or if anyone has any counterpoints or criticisms, or feels, you know, that what are the negatives of having a parking permit policy. I'd be very interested to learn what people think a negative would be in instituting a parking permit policy.
There are multiple questions in the chat.
Well,
Would you like
okay.
me?
Let's deal with the panel, please.
Okay.
Leo, I have a quick question. I assume when
Sure.
you're talking about the residents, you're just talking about anybody who pays the City of Lewes taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so so in other words, if you're talking about all those huge developments on Gills Neck Road and out around 5 Points and everything, they would.
No. People who are within the city limits of Lewes.
Just the city. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So because I'm just thinking, you know, in the next couple years, there's going to be 1,630 new dwellings on this side of Route 1. You know, new residents, rentals, whatever. And we're talking, you know, I guess it's almost to the point where I think Lewes Beach is going to be almost like a private beach for Lewes residents, and maybe anybody on the outlying or the rentals. But I mean, you know, the thing of it, I mean, the parking permit idea, I think is probably going to end up being a good one, because you're right, we can't have the beaches so overrun and people running up and down the dunes and storing their catamarans on the dunes and things. So I think I think maybe it will be good, but there's going to be an awful lot of people down here, and I don't know what the city of Lewes is going to look like in another 5 years.
Yeah, the houses you mentioned, Linda, I'm not sure, maybe Dennis or Tim knows if they would be within the city of limits.
Most of them are out. Most of them would be outside of the city.
Mm-hmm. So in other words,
excuse me, let me speak to that, please. I did a count on this several months ago, and Linda's numbers, I don't have my document in front of me. I apologize. I'm not prepared to discuss this, but my recollection is but I will also say that with the number of houses that have been approved, or the number of houses that will become part of the city because of annexation, I think, Linda, what was the number you gave? 1,000 what? 1,600?
1,630, and that wasn't even including
right. Well,
Mary
over
Creek.
500 of those units are going to be inside the city limits.
Oh, they are?
I don't know what your data is, but it's a very, very large number of housing units are coming into the city.
Is that going to be Tower Hill?
Yes. We have a pre-annexation agreement. I was just getting ready to say, either they will be built inside our present city limits, or they are
Okay.
covered under a pre-annexation agreement.
Tim, I'd like to speak to that.
Right.
Tower Hill is not contiguous to the city right now, and they would have to become contiguous to the city to be annexed in. And
That's
I know
correct.
there's not a pre-annexation agreement that says that, but I don't think we can count that in there yet until that happens. And the only property that was annexed is the Brittingham property, and that's only 89 townhouses.
Right, but we have, we
White's
also,
Pond
of
Meadow.
course, have, that's exactly right. White's
I'm
Pond
sorry, I
Meadow
didn't hear
is,
that.
pardon?
I didn't hear what somebody said other than you.
Anne Marie said we have the White's Pond Meadow subdivision that has also been annexed in, and that will also add to our population in the city.
White Pond Meadow is already in the city, and it wasn't annexed in recently. It's been in the city a long time. So
Yes, but there are no houses on that property right now, Dennis.
Right.
That's the point. There will
I'm
be
not
houses.
arguing with you, Tim. I understand White Pond Meadow's coming in,
Correct.
but
I-
it is in the city. It's not annexed property. It's been in the city for years and years.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
was my comment.
I'd like to offer
Fine.
a comment, and Khalil asked just a couple of questions. And again, thank you for the presentation. I think that was really, really helpful. And I remember reading your proposal a while ago and was being very impressed. And again, thank you for raising all of those issues. In some ways, the debate we just had, or the discussion we just had, seems to underscore that even if we do absolutely nothing, we're going to have an ever-growing problem as far as visitors to the beach. So, I mean, if we're trying to accommodate day trippers and so on, while the city is adding people by the hundreds or homes by the hundreds, I think it just demonstrates you have to do something. And that's why I think the permit does make sense. Some ways, I think Linda's point, in some ways, is an argument for permits. Khalil, you mentioned two things I thought were really interesting. I wanted just to flesh out a little bit. I assume that two components of parking, of a permit parking system. One is you have to be able to designate where the spots are.
Correct.
I think on our very first meeting we had of this committee, that some of us, not all of us, some of us expressed that there was confusion for people who live here as well as people who visit here as to where you can park. What is appropriate spot? And I think that having an opportunity to designate those not only is essential to a permit system, it's also invaluable to the people who live here, and it avoids all sorts of unnecessary problems that property owners have when people are parking where they shouldn't. Second, that necessitates, though, some enforcement mechanism, some sort of enforcement scheme, actual enforcement. So I just wanted you to talk briefly about, if you could, about enforcement, but also the designation component of your policy.
Sure. So you're right, Kevin. Absolutely. When you mention designation, I suspect you mean the actual delineation of actual parking spots. What would be a legal parking spot? And, certainly we all know, for example, in front of the Children's Beach House, there's been a lot of parking there. People have parked there. I mean, I don't know. I assume that's within a right of way there. I mean, that certainly provides a lot of parking there. To me, it really comes down to it's more of an engineering question than anything. I would certainly think, for example, on the side streets where I live, that you would only park, you wouldn't be able to park right up to the stop sign or to Cedar Street, because that would hinder sight lines in terms of being able to access Cedar. So are you asking how they would be designated?
No, no, what I wanted to stress is I think the importance of designating spots. I don't think that we need to work and determine what state laws apply and so on, but any permit system is going to be reliant upon a designation of where a public person can park. And I don't think it's clear whatsoever, especially for those of us who live here, who have roamed the streets here. It's not clear. The second thing is, it would seem to me if you're going to have a permit system, you have to have enforcement of that permit system. You can't just have a permit system in abstract and then never enforce or take action against those who are parking illegally.
Well, I'm not certain on the second point on enforcement. I'm not certain if that would come under, Anne Marie could probably answer this, come under the city manager's jurisdiction, or that would come under the police jurisdiction. I do believe there was some discussion in a previous police ad hoc committee. I'm not sure how that was going to end it up, but I don't know if Anne Marie, were you going to take over park enforcement?
I think that's still to be determined. But regardless, I think you know, we've got a structure for parking enforcement. It would, if we went to a permit system, what we would do is look to increase the staffing of that. So I think we, you know, it's really just a matter of, instead of having 5 guys, we have 10 or 12. You know, so it's just a matter of staffing up for it. So I don't think that's a problem. If there is a permit system, we would absolutely, without a doubt, add the enforcement to go with it.
Okay, before we continue, I saw a question in the chat here that was a good one, and I should have mentioned it earlier. Let me find it. Would parking permits address the high parking demand that occurs only during a few months in the summer? Otherwise, parking on Lewes Beach is not a big issue. It's a great question. I should have mentioned earlier, yes, indeed. The parking permit policy would only be in effect from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I'll add that's pretty consistent with many of the other policies employed by Rehoboth, Dewey, and others as well. So yes, it would only be essentially a 3-month or so program. So all, you know, for 9 months, there would not be permits required to park in Lewes Beach. It would be for those the high season time.
Lil, you also mentioned that you thought a permit system would encourage people to use the beach off-peak hours. What hours would you propose the permits be in effect?
10 o'clock to 5 o'clock is what I'd listed. And that was basically taken from what other jurisdictions, other beach towns basically have employed. So 10 o'clock, of course, that is obviously negotiable. If the city council and this committee wanted to do 9 to 6, or, you know, but I think that's pretty standard. And I think it also leaves enough time before 10 o'clock and also 5 o'clock after, where people don't have permits or don't want to buy a permit or don't want to, gives them plenty of time to access Lewes Beach. Since
who else has questions?
Go ahead.
Who else has questions for Khalil?
Anybody else have any? Thank you. Does anybody have any
I do
concerns or you know, problems with why a permit policy would potentially be a negative, or what problems it might
I have a question, Khalil. Under your plan, are you suggesting that would there be a separate permit for, when I'm thinking like a sticker, but you know, some kind of identifying marker that homeowners of homes on Lewes Beach would mark their cars with those particular stickers, those particular passes?
Tim, that's obviously it's a good question, and I don't have a firm recommendation or idea on that. It could be a sticker, it could be a piece of paper that you put on your windshield. I would think a sticker may be a little bit confusing, even though people use them, because you'd have to have a new sticker every year, and some people don't like putting multiple stickers on their car. You know, especially if you're going to have guest passes, they're going to be for someone who comes down for the day.
Did you get that?
They would put that on their windshield. Maybe would require,
Sure.
you know, underneath the wind. So maybe for consistency purposes, we would have those on those for everybody. It would also permit transferability too, if somebody wanted to use it for a guest in their home.
Well, that was the point that I was getting to, because I think your proposal did it not suggest that there would be stickers or passes for homeowners, and then also a second type of sticker for visitors. And those visitors could in fact be visitors who are visiting those same homeowners, correct?
Right. Yes, and I don't know if I ever used the word sticker.
I know, pass.
Yeah,
I don't know what to call them.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, stick. It would just. I would hope it would be something that's consistent and that it's easily identifiable to enforcement folks and others. Again, that is something that is, you know, I think is something that could easily be worked out, but something clearly identifiable so that people would know that that person is parking legally and has a permit to park there.
I would suggest that if we do move to permits, that we involve the parking enforcement supervisor in determining what type of permit, because as it relates to, you know, how you enforce it, you know, there are some things that work better than others. We do have the ability within our system to simply get the tag numbers that we could associate them with the tag number. What that wouldn't work for is the rentals, where typically a lot of times you'll have a rental and it's like, okay, here's your 2 parking passes. So, you know, I know Dewey Beach uses hang tags. The city or the University of Delaware for their parking permits used to use hang tags, but they now just associate it with the license plate. So there's a number of ways it could be done.
Yeah, I mean, look, that information is great, Anne Marie. I mean, I think at least I'm very open to any form of permit, hang tags, a small, you know, sign on your windshield and under your windshield. And so to me, that's something that, you know, I think as long as it's consistent, you know, and readily identifiable by enforcement, I think I don't have any, you know, really hard and firm beliefs on that.
Thank you.
I did see something here in the chat I think we should address. Let me read this question. How was the beach capacity in public parking lots determined? Was there a ratio of parking spaces to the square foot of beach? If so, can the same ratio be used to determine if more spaces could be accommodated on the beach between Savannah and the inlet, meaning obviously Lewes Beach? That's a great question. I mean, we talked about this at our last meeting about beach capacity. How do we determine that? You know, Dennis, you may be able to speak to this, because when you were discussing it in the previous committee about expanding Lot 1, and that was rejected because of capacity reasons. Essentially, we were going to overwhelm the bathhouse or the beach. Did you ever get any kind of anything on paper or any methodology? Was you given any numbers, or I wonder how that decision was arrived at?
It was purely a response from the city that they had reached the capacity there. And I think capacity along Lewes Beach from beach parking lot 2 down to the inlet is something that really needs to be addressed. And being a longtime resident here, I have watched how with the planting of the grass on the dunes are actually growing towards the water. and areas now that you can't enter into because of the grass and the dunes used to be where the public could go. So, you know, sometimes in where Kevin and I are, and probably where you are, at high tide, the beach area is very narrow. At low tide, there's a lot more. But it really does, capacity is, I think, a big issue. I think enforcement is a big issue. And there are a lot of details to be worked out if we're going to go to parking permits. And that's not going to, I don't think we're going to solve that. I think that's something that perhaps the city should consider a committee just to address that issue if they want it, and to work out all the details. If you I've read Bethany, Dewey, and Rehoboth's, and they're all different. And there's some nice pieces that one could take out of each one of them to make it fit into Lewes if the city goes in that direction.
I would strongly urge anyone on the committee who hasn't yet to come on down here on the beach and at high tide. Mother Nature's voting at the moment, and the beach is the usable beach areas here at high tide are shrinking. So I think it is, then Dennis, you sort of intimated it. I would strongly encourage the members of the committee come down and take a look. You get a fairly vivid picture of what we could be talking about, especially with all the other water level changes that may be coming for the city. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
beach capacity is on our next agenda if we can get to it. I've got a few questions, Khalil.
Sure.
Can I?
Yep, fire away.
Ask you a few things. The reasons I get that you're, and by the way, I'm sorry, my connection seems to be a little bit unstable.
Okay.
But
We can hear you.
the reasons seem to be to deal with congestion, and its related safety issues, to reserve parking for residents and their visitors, and to increase revenues possibly. Have I got those three right?
Yep, those are certainly three of the reasons.
Okay, and let me ask you, I drew a parallel to the Lewes Beach in terms of capacity, and you spoke of the capacity of the restrooms on Lewes Beach being stretched or at capacity. Wouldn't that duration really suggest there's no capacity at all on Lewes Beach for anybody who can't get into a bathroom at one of the houses?
Not necessarily, no. First of all, Lewes Beach Lot 1 doesn't have any residences. It's a public lot where people park and access the beach. People here, this is a community.
Right.
There are people who live here and people who have lived here, like Dennis and others, for generations and have had homes here. So I don't think comparing Lewes Beach proper, the community of Lewes Beach, meaning from Savannah Road to the inlet, to Lot 1 or Lot 2 is comparable in that it's a totally different animal, so to speak. I mean, we have homes here. They have now maybe 6 or 7 homes there that recently been built behind the Dairy Queen. But, you know, that beach has always been designated with a public lot as number 2, and as the Cape Henlopen State Park has as well. So if you're I think you're implying, or at least introducing to the idea that because we don't have parking, we don't have restroom facilities, we have no capacity. Is that accurate? What you're trying to say is because we have no restroom, we have no capacity in turn, right?
Seems to follow from your suggestion that capacity of restrooms is a constraint at Lewes Beach.
Well, remember, the city rejected expanding Lot 1 because of two reasons. One is it would overwhelm the restroom facility, and it would overwhelm the beach itself. So there were two reasons given there. And so again, we may have lost some of your comments earlier, Rob, because of the connection. But again, I want to be clear. You're suggesting that Lewes Beach, because it doesn't have parking, bathroom facilities, that somehow that means it doesn't have any capacity. Is that accurate?
Well, I'm wondering, wouldn't that seem to follow from your suggestion?
I would argue no, because again, we have plenty of we have restroom facilities here. Those are facilities we use in our homes, and there are no homes that people have there. They have a central facility and it's primarily geared towards visitors, clearly, because you have ample parking and you have a major restroom facility there. Lewes Beach is a public beach. People do access Lewes Beach from outside the quote unquote Lewes Beach community, but there really hasn't been a major need to have restroom facilities because people have them in their homes. Now, I would submit that there's plenty of other jurisdictions, Dewey Beach being one of them, that has a similar community. They don't have public restrooms there in Dewey Beach, certainly on the beach. And they also have very limited parking as well there. So I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure it's enough for me to say we need to have a public restroom every third street on Lewes Beach to accommodate the visitors.
I'm not, we're not getting into restrooms, but I was wondering if, in terms of the capacity, I just had that question. Let me go on to another one. Is it you're thinking that visitors who are sponsored by a homeowner should be favored over visitors who aren't?
No, not necessarily. What I'm suggesting is that however a permit policy and permits are distributed, certainly homeowners on Lewes Beach and residents of Lewes proper should have access to parking permits. Now, obviously, people like me and Kevin and Dennis who live here and others who live in the beach, we have guests. And routinely, but many of us also have plenty of parking within their own property that they probably wouldn't even be applying or even seeking a permit because they have spots for 4 cars, so they wouldn't care about getting a permit. The guests, although we would have the option potentially of securing 1 or 2 extra transferable permits that we would use for guests that have here. So if you're asking, do I view guests of residents having priority over people that come from the outside or coming here for the day? I don't look at it that way. I look at it simply as Lewes is a public beach. We do not want to close it off to visitors. There will be permits available for visitors on a first come, first served basis. And once they're exhausted, they're exhausted. That's just the same way it is in other beach towns. But I'm not trying to place priority over my guests over visitors. I'm just simply saying, as long as visitors have access to beach passes, parking permit passes, I should say. I don't want to get into the beach pass issue. But no, don't worry, that's not it. We don't want to become New Jersey. I understand that. So
isn't a guest also called a renter? I mean,
He might be.
We have guests here that they don't rent. We don't.
No, but I'm saying, I thought when Cleo did his initial explanation, he was trying to address the reality that obviously people rent here. And if you put a sticker on a car for someone who rents the house, it's not that helpful. Whereas some of the things that have been discussed today, we're trying to address the reality. A lot of homes here are rented. and you want to do something to help facilitate their ability for those people who are renting to enjoy the beach.
Right.
Is that fair, Cleo?
That's very fair.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
I think I'd like to add that parking in the city of Lewes is not just an issue here on the beach. It's also an issue in town. And a lot of people in town have renters, and there may be multiple families in homes. So it's not unique to us. It's also part of the whole city has the issue, same as Bethany and Dewey and Rehoboth. It's a citywide issue. It's not restricted to one area. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
So far, we haven't proposed elsewhere in the city that residents or their paying guests be preferred over day trippers, as you call them. So this would be a first.
I don't
Let
see
me
it as
ask
a
you another
preference at all. I agree with Khalil. You know, there's a limited amount of spaces, just like in town. If someone drove in to go to a restaurant in Lewes and they couldn't find a place to park, you know, they would have to leave. When Khalil went down to Bethany, he couldn't find a place to park, he left. All the beach towns on the coast, from Broadkill to Fenwick, have the same issues. And it's just the volume is higher in the summer, and it's something you have to live with and try to make the best of.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah.
Khalil, I had another question.
Sure. Sure, Rob.
As a practical matter, if you're trying to avoid, among other things, the environmental issue that you raised, the people wandering around trying to find spaces when there aren't enough, which creates both a safety issue and an environmental concern.
Right.
That would suggest that if you're going to have permits, that you talked about delineating spaces for permits, you would need more spaces than permits, or then you would need more spaces than your estimate of how many people will be coming to use those permits on a particular day. Otherwise, you'll still have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure I agree. If we have a finite designated number of parking spots that are, available, then at some point between, certainly between Memorial Day and Labor Day, especially on weekends, they're going to be used up pretty quickly. But we're going to know how many there are there. And it's certainly, that number is certainly going to be less than what currently occurs on weekends, in particular on Lewes Beach. And that is massive amount of cars parked everywhere, massive amount of people just driving all over the place looking for spots. And I don't think there's any doubt that if we're designating certain spots that are legal and safe, it's going to reduce the congestion, and it's going to reduce the emissions that occur every weekend, where people who aren't familiar, they go to lot 1 or lot 2 and they're told to come here, or frankly, they go to the state park, which closes sometimes at 10 or 11 because their parking lot is filled, and they come here because they're told to come here. And they don't really know. I feel for them. They don't know the area. They don't know where to park. I don't know how many times people have asked me right in front of my house, can I park here? And they're very nice. And I said, yep, you can. Just make sure you're not too close to Cedar and you block the way. So, I would submit that, designated spots and a permit program would reduce the number of vehicles coming here, and people would have to be a little more educated about, with a permit, they would know where to go, where there's a legal spot, and when to park. And I think that would reduce the carbon footprint as opposed to the status quo.
Okay. Here's another, this is really a little bit more of a philosophical issue. If you charge for permits, then, and you give some free to the people who already live on Lewes Beach.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think a lot, let me just Go ahead and I'll
some
answer. Go ahead, I'm
free to
sorry.
residents of the city, perhaps on a whatever basis. So the people on the beach get some for themselves and their visitors. The people on Lewes, in the city of Lewes would get some. The people outside the city would have to bid for them in a lottery system or first come, first serve system. Is there an issue of equity there? Because the people who live on Lewes Beach are relatively well off. The people who live in the city of Lewes are relatively well off. The further people live outside the city, probably the less well off they are. If this beach is in trust for the people of the county, as well as the people of the city, how does that really work? Aren't we favoring the well off?
So I think everything in my proposal, I've always been consistent in that this will either be paid parking, paid permitting for everybody, I think originally I had mentioned that people who live in Lewes, who are residents of Lewes, would get free parking passes, and visitors, as you said, would pay for them. Presumably at Lot 1 or City Hall or wherever, they would get a permit. That is also, and I think I mentioned in there, is totally amendable. For example, I think you could have parking in Lewes, permitting, that was free for everybody, and potentially could be free to somebody who comes to the Lot 1 looking for a parking spot there. But that makes no sense because people pay to park there. So therefore, why would they would just come there and get a spot to come park here free? I would submit that to be consistent and to be consistent with your equity argument, I'm confident, although this would have to be debated at the city council, that as a resident of Lewes Beach, as a resident of Lewes proper, I'd be very happy to pay for my parking permit. It would not be given to me free. Rehoboth, for example, homeowners do get 2 permits for free. But I think we're smaller than Rehoboth. They have other revenue sources. So I would be open to having everyone on Lewes Beach and everyone in Lewes pay for parking, a permit, as well as visitors who come from outside of Lewes also pay for parking. That way, and the added benefit there is we also are now generating a fairly healthy revenue stream to help fund and underwrite the added enforcement people we're going to need, Anne Marie and others. So this potentially creates, a user fee essentially for new staff in Lewes Beach, for parking, that is. So I want to be consistent. And I think your point is well taken. I totally want to be consistent and treat everyone fairly. I personally have no problem paying for a permit. I think when people pay for something like that, I think they feel more invested in their community. And I also think it gives people, just frankly, more ownership of their community. So your point's well taken. I do think I would have to do some research to see if other areas, if there are precedents for people who are homeowners. Well, I can Rehoboth get 2 parking permits for free, yet others have to pay. We in Lewes, when we drive to Rehoboth, have to pay. So I'm very open to that. To your point, the paid aspect of it was originally proposed by me as a revenue source to help, because I didn't want the city to say, we can't afford increased enforcement personnel. You know, we need to find the money somewhere. This way, we were paying for that already with the parking permits. So that would create the revenue source that would help fund that additional personnel. But thank you for that, because I think it's a fair point.
Can I follow up to Khalil's point? I would think that we would need to have at least a modest fee, again, just to administer the program. But we could, we could do something in the other towns. It's $150 or $200. We could do $50. Again, just enough that we can cover the expenses. But the other thing that making it not free would do is, and I think you mentioned it before, is there are plenty of times where people come up to the streets to park when the lots aren't full. You get
Yes.
you get a little more privacy and free parking if you go up there, where you get more of a crowd and you pay for parking if you're at the public lot. So I could certainly see where that would kind of level that part out of.
Mm-hmm. Let me also add to the equity issue, Rob, in that if we were to pay for parking here, permits, Anne Marie mentioned, a modest fee. Rehoboth is, higher for, that's a cost issue that would have to be figured out. But I would still submit actually that if we're paying for parking permits and visitors are coming and paying for $10 a day or whatever it might be, they're still we're paying more than they are. So there's, one could argue the equity that we're actually subsidizing them to, have parking access here. I just think it's I'm open. I think other people are open to paying for these permits, and I don't think they need to be onerous or prohibitive costs, because I think it's unfair to the residents who are already pay taxes to the city to fund city services like enforcement and others. Shouldn't have to pay onerous or prohibitive fees. But I mentioned it almost as a gesture of good faith that we're not looking for the city. We're trying to be cooperative and trying to help finance and fund the implementation of a parking permit program. And some of us, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some residents of Lewes are going to call me up and email me and scream at me and tell me that I'm not paying for a damn parking permit. How dare you speak for me? But I just have a good sense. I think people would be willing to pay a modest fee to enhance their quality of life and enhance the safety of themselves and their children and others who walk on Cedar, who walk across Cedar to go to the beach and try to, access Cedar from their own streets without having to slam on the brakes when they pull out because a car is coming down Cedar and they can't see them.
As you alluded to, perhaps a day permit as well as a season permit. There's obviously a lot of administrative issues to work out. I think Dennis
Absolutely
recognized that when he's
absolutely
another committee. We don't have much time, and what I would suggest we do, because we have a very full agenda next time, is try to wrap this up with some kind of sense of the committee that we can embody in a report. And I think I'm hearing that there's substantial interest in a permit system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly have a lot of interest in it.
So,
Rob, I wanted to thank you for offering that. I think obviously for some of us, the devil will be in the details of the wording of it, but I agree. I hope we can fashion a recommendation involving a permit policy.
Do you think that that's not something we should have a a separate meeting on or a committee to address and present something. Perhaps a few of us could work on getting together and work out some details and bring it back next meeting or either the city create a permit parking committee to explore it.
I hope we could make a
I
recommendation.
don't think we have.
And, I'd like we make
Sorry,
a recommendation, and I'm encouraging you to make a recommendation on this point as opposed to recommend creating another committee.
As you said, the devil's in the details, and that.
Well, but I think
agree with a recommendation, but I don't know that I'm prepared to address all the details right now in a motion.
No, and I don't think this committee has to address all the details.
Okay.
I would think that if the committee made a recommendation and if there were things that you had that you wanted to make sure were part of it, like the delineation of spaces, if you want to
enforcement,
right, that you go ahead and put those in the motion, and then the city would work on developing kind of the structure of a program. And before we would implement it, I would think we would take it out to public workshop or, we're not just going to show up and say, here it is. We would put it out and get feedback before we put it, made it live.
So Khalil, I'm hearing that something along the following lines might be what you're looking for at this stage. That you would recommend that the council favorably consider a permit system coupled with delineation of parking spaces and enforcement for the high season on Lewes Beach. Does that sound about right? Or, but just move that out.
Yeah. A permit system, we can mention paid or otherwise. I'm just trying to think that through. I mean, obviously we've got limited time, and look, let me ask you this. Is there anybody on the committee that objects or has a problem with a permit policy being favorably recommended? Or, I mean, I want to make sure that we're all singing off the same song sheet here, so to speak. I mean, I'm obviously in favor of consideration of a permit policy, and I certainly, if someone has any problems with it, I'd like to hear it so we can address it. And I mean, to me, I would love to have a unanimous recommendation, because I think that sends a strong signal to the council that this is something that enjoys broad support and unanimous support. So if there's anybody who has any problems with it or concerns, I think somebody even mentioned that in the chat, asked does anybody have any objections or and I mean, it's fine if someone does. I mean, we don't always have to be 100% on the same page.
Well, I'll speak.
But otherwise,
I liked what Rob said as a motion, and I would certainly be fully in agreement of exploring that possibility of permit parking here. Many details to be worked out.
Rob, might I suggest something? It's for the committee's consideration that, a lot of times when you make a report, you not only make the recommendation, but you delineate the pros and cons, which Khalil has delineated 5 or 6 pros, and I think we've talked about some of the cons as well. So I would suggest that you put those into your recommendation in the report.
And actually,
it's a good idea, but and in our last meeting, we will all have a chance to look at whatever I've drafted and go over it and decide whether or not it's what we want to say.
Rob, to that end, will you be sharing what you're going to?
I don't know. Sorry, Kevin.
No, are you? This raises a question I've asked a couple of times. So, on that final meeting, will you be sharing in advance the language you are proposing? Or are we in a position of just voting yay or nay on what you propose? In other words, can we expand, amend, add, edit, those sort of?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I will have failed if I don't get it to you in time for you to give it full consideration before that
Great.
meeting.
Thank you, sir.
And Khalil, it looked like you were reading from something when you were going through your
Yep.
summary of a program. Can you email that to me?
Sure.
Janine will like it for the minutes, I'm sure, but I think it would also be very helpful because you've clearly put a lot of thought in.
Yep. I will send it, right after the meeting.
Well, does anyone want to make a motion on this subject?
I move that we include in our recommendations to the city council a recommendation addressing the development and implementation of a permit system. In other words, I'm trying. No, boy, don't make me do it again, Rob. I was making that up as I went along. You're going to kill me. But I was trying not to preclude. I was trying to avoid getting into the specific language right now until we all see words in front of us.
Right.
But I was just going to recommend, to your point, I think you're getting at, which I think is a very good one, is that we agree to include a recommendation regarding permit parking in the overall recommendation we'll be making to the city council.
Kevin, do you want to put in there addressing delineating consideration for delineating parking spaces and enforcement?
I was wanted to keep it general because I think there are like 3 or 4 things. I think you have to reference capacity, you have to reference enforcement, you have to designations and so on. So I just was trying to make sure that one of the topics that we will be addressing in our recommendation is a permit parking system.
Okay, and thank you, Kevin. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Yep.
And Janine, did you get that motion down? Great. Further discussion on that motion. Hearing none, is there all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Tim, were you saying aye or nay, Tim?
Oh, yes, aye.
Okay. All right, so in
I
no
apologize.
opposed so we've got a motion accepted without opposition. And it is now, by my watch, 7:28, thank goodness.
Yeah, really.
And
Rob, as you know, I've raised with you my interest in adding to include in the agenda for the next meeting. I know it's already been printed, but it does not include these items. That
it can be amended.
I move that when the committee meets on January 19th, that we include on the list of issues to be discussed the current no parking signage and the policy for the placement of no parking signs, bikes and bike racks, and enforcement.
And can we add to that paper streets?
Wait a minute.
Well, Dennis, before we add,
Let's
see if this
what was the third one, Kevin?
Enforcement.
Signage.
No, it's
enforcement. Thank you.
No parking signage and the policy, bikes and bike
right,
and enforcement. And just for the record, these were things we agreed we were going to try to discuss back in.
That's correct.
Before the holiday season, sir.
The agenda for the 19th is posted, and I tried to cover those things. Could you take a look at it?
Yeah,
I'm
sorry. The one I got did not have it on, but maybe I got the wrong one. Let me take a look. Can I look for it?
Sure.
Or I can read it
to you. Kevin, Janine posted it yesterday, and then Rob gave her some changes, so it was reposted today. So you
Oh.
might have seen it before she got Rob's changes.
I think I did. I think I
All
did.
right.
I apologize. I did not know that.
Not at all.
It does look like a lot of those issues are on the agenda now.
Okay, great. So Rob, did
Okay.
we've talked about this before, Rob. You know the 3 things I was suggesting. You had some others. Is that list that you shared with me earlier in your email, is that the list that we're going to be talking about at the next meeting?
Pretty much, but just to avoid any misunderstanding, let me just run through it quickly. The first is the issue of beach capacity, and Charlie's going to talk to that. Next is clustering mailboxes, should be quick.
Yeah.
Bicycles, next. Bike racks and trash cans at beach entrances is the next after that. Then current no parking signage and placement policy, parking enforcement, and alley clearances,
right.
Which there's no way in the world we'll ever get to alley clearances. And we can, if anybody likes, we can shift these, the order of these agenda items around at the start of the meeting. That's what it now looks like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I had not seen that yet. Thank you very much.
When,
Thank you. I think
Rob, before we
suggestions.
adjourn, can I just make one quick comment? I just scrolled through the chat a little bit, and I do want to acknowledge a lot of people have commented on capacity and have mentioned it a number of times. We need to consider it. And I just, for those that are still listening, I mean, we discussed this at the last meeting, and it is clearly going to be a key issue and a key driver of any new policy that's implemented. So I did want the people in the chat in attendees to understand that we acknowledge that, and capacity will always be a key driver of all this.
Will, thank you for that. And to follow that up, Janine, you've been recording the chats, haven't you? Can you distribute the chats to everybody on the committee?
Yes, I have them. I've been copying them just to make sure, so I will distribute them.
That's great, because
Thank you.
then we can take them into account when we hit capacity at our next meeting.
Rob, I have a question. Do we want to address the paper streets? We talked about them, but we didn't do anything. If we can just leave them alone, or if you want, I'm prepared to make a motion in the next meeting or whenever regarding them.
Dennis, I thought, we've hit the paper streets and rolled them out and then rolled them out.
Okay, if whether they're rolled out, then I'm fine.
They weren't. They were ruled out of our consideration.
Okay, that's all I wanted to make sure of. Thank you.
We haven't talked about them, so.
Okay.
All right. So I think we're ready to adjourn if anybody, unless people want to keep going. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Yeah.
In favor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Everybody who
Have a good
attended
evening.
also.
All right. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.